Okay, all right. This is an image that's been scanned in from the Mamiya, and you'll notice right off the bat, there already seems to be kind of a problem with the color, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use our curves and our black and white point to do some color corrections. So just as a reminder, when we scan your image in, remember I told you not to crop whenever you scan. Go ahead and scan the entire image area. And then if you know, for instance, say here that you see just the little top of the sweep right here, rather than cropping that when you scan, go ahead and crop it later so that you can maintain the 6 by 4.5 aspect ratio, which is the aspect ratio of the Mamiya camera. So that's the size of your actual negative. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is, if I do decide to crop, I would go over here to my crop tool, and you can see that the ratio is set here as a 3:1 ratio. And just to make sure that I maintain the 6 to 4.5, you see in this top corner up here where the crop tool is, I'm gonna change that to 6, 4.5. Now, if you change it to 6, 4.5 and the image is vertical, then you're just gonna need to hit these arrow keys right here, and it'll change the height and the width. It just swaps the height and the width. So if you put the ratio in and it's the wrong orientation, just click on those two little arrows and it's gonna swap it. So something that you guys might not be aware of, we also have the straighten tool. So for instance, if you had a building or you had a horizon line, then you could use that straighten tool right here. It just looks like a bubble level. And you could run that across a building or a horizon line and it would straighten the image up. So it's right here, straighten. That tool is also in Lightroom and it is very, very handy.
Wait, what's it for?
Straighten.
Just like...
Yep, so let's say that this is my horizon line, and I clicked on the straighten tool, and I see how it gives me some crosshairs and a bubble level. Let's say that this was my horizon and I needed to straighten it. I would just run this across my horizon and then it would straighten it, and it would also crop it to correct for that unlevel horizon.
Horizon tool, you said?
No, it's called straighten, and this is something that you can find in Lightroom using the crop tool. It's also in Photoshop. Now, in this image, I don't want to straighten it because look what happens. It cuts off some of her hair. So rather than straightening it because I've got a little bit of that sweep up there, I'm going to, well, I'll just start back over. I'm going to probably just go in and clean up that edge because I don't want to lose any more room at the top of her head because she needs some breathing room right around the top of her head, right? So I'm not going to crop into the hair. But if you did have something where you needed to straighten, that straighten tool is very handy. Here's another thing. There's so many different things to find and discover in Photoshop. The great thing about it is there's always a dialog box that pops up whenever you hover over top of something. So for this one, it's showing you rule of thirds or the golden ratio or the golden spiral, so you can see how your image fits within these different types of compositional tools.
Is that a little square or what is it?
It's right here, so it's next to the straighten, and it just looks like kind of a little wave inside of a rectangle. So for instance, if you wanted to see how your image held up within the rule of thirds, then it just shows you that overlay on top of your image. It's not something that's really critical, it's just something that can be handy. If you're trying to figure out where to crop an image, that can be something handy. The next thing over that I think is important is this dialog right here where it says delete cropped pixels.
I'm sorry, I just said grid tool.
So this is, it just shows you an overlay of different compositional layout. So we've all heard of the rule of thirds. You may have also heard of the golden ratio or the golden spiral. So these are just different overlays on your image to show how, it may aid you if you're deciding to crop an image somewhere. Does that make sense? It's just an overlay. It doesn't do anything to your image. So I'm just gonna get rid of that for now. The next thing over that is really important is where it says delete cropped pixels. So if I have this checked and I crop my image, it is going to throw away any portion of the image that I've cropped. Which makes sense because you've cropped it, right? But have you ever wanted to go back after you've cropped something? Maybe at some point in time. Say you didn't use the 6:4.5 aspect ratio and you worked on your image for an hour, and then I'm like, that's not 6:4.5. So now you need to go back to the original file, the original image size. You have to start over. But if you don't have delete cropped pixels checked, then that information is still there in your background layer. Does that make sense? So it doesn't get rid of it. So if the delete cropped pixels is not checked, then I could always go back to the original crop.
If you have duplicated your background layer and have that checked, is your background layer still intact? Would you still have it if you're not working on the block on this layer?
If you crop it and I would say honestly, I would just make sure that delete cropped pixels isn't checked if you want to make sure that all of your file is there. But we're going to get to exactly what Lisa's talking about and giving our insurance policy with a duplicate of our background layer. So I'm going to leave that unchecked. But I can see that my image is, I want to leave it as it is. I don't actually want to crop it. So, but if you do need to crop it, make sure that you're maintaining that particular aspect ratio. All right, so with that said, what is the next thing that we do when we open an image in Photoshop? First thing we do. We
Make a copy of the layer.
Okay, so we're going to make a copy of our background layer. So we've got our background here, and I'm going to make a copy of it. That way, if I've made changes to my image, I can always go back. So it's like having one layer of protection on our original file. Now, Jolie, when we first opened our file, we've opened this as a TIFF because when we scanned our document, we scanned it as a TIFF. So once we get done with this file, we're going to have a bunch of layers. So what do I save a Photoshop document as when there's a bunch of layers and I'm working on it?
PSD.
As a working file, which is a PSD. So right now it's a TIFF because that's our original scan. Once I get done with it, I'm going to save it as a PSD with all of those layers intact.
Is it a good idea to save it immediately as that so that you're leaving your tip alone? And
No, because then you would end up having to, you would be saving over it. And so the TIFF is going to remain the TIFF. Just whenever you get done, just make sure that you save as a PSD. So I've got my background layer here. And before I do anything, just because it kind of annoys me, I want to rotate this so that I'm seeing it right side up. And remember that if you scan using the instructions that Epson has provided for you, you may find that your image has been reversed, that it's backwards. And I think that we talked about how you could flip it in your rotation. So image rotation, and then it was flip vertical, I think. But for this, I just need to rotate it. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. Great. Okay. Now, I want to go ahead and get rid of that little line from the sweep up here. But rather than doing that on my background copy, there's another way to get rid of blemishes or footprints or flyaway hairs, and that is to create an empty layer. So you'll see that if I turn off my background layers, I'm left with a totally transparent layer. I'm going to turn these back on, and now I'm going to clean this up right here. And to do that, I'm just going to use my my spot healing brush, and I'm going to show you why I use this. Let's say that I went in and I cleaned this up.
I think you need to convert them to
You could convert things to smart objects, but this is an empty layer, so I'm not gonna do anything with smart objects just yet. But let's say that I got rid of this and I'm happy with that. I'm not happy with it, but let's just say I was. And then I went in to start doing some skin retouching, and I'm doing a fabulous job with my skin retouching. What? Oh, I see. Yeah, I didn't even see that initially. So now I realize that whatever work that I've done on my image maybe isn't working. So rather than having to go back to my history palette and say, okay, I need to go back 44 steps to get rid of that mistake that I made, whenever I was talking on my cell phone or paying attention to somebody else. Rather than do that, all I'm gonna do is hit the E for erase, and then I can erase back to my original image, and I won't have to go backwards in my history palette. Does that make sense? So it's just a really easy way to ensure that if you do a lot of work on one layer, that you don't have to throw that whole layer away if you made a mistake.
So you just hit E or you hold the E down while you're
No, it's just, E is for erase. So E just goes over here to my tool palette and gives me, it's the key command for erase. And so I've just erased it from my transparent layer here. Now, this is gonna happen to you, and it always happens to me, where I'm trying to use the healing brush or the spot healing, and I go to work on my image, I go to work on my image and nothing's happening, right? Nothing's going on. The reason why is because right here at the top where it says sample all layers, it's not checked. So if you're trying to use a tool and nothing's going on, it's most likely because sample all layers is not checked. Because remember, we're working on a layer that has no pixels. So in order for us to make changes to this, we have to make sure that sample all layers is checked. And now I can go in and actually clean up any parts of my image that I feel like need to be cleaned up. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but whenever you are looking at your images, you should be reviewing them and cleaning them up at 100%. So if you look to the very bottom left corner of the Photoshop, I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen. See right here where it says 66.67? That's the percentage, that's just how zoomed in I am. So when you're working on these, whenever I grade it, I'm gonna look at everything at 100%. So when you clean your images from all the terrible dust that's going to be on the negatives, you should be doing that at 100% because that's how I'm gonna look at your image. So you should always scan into 100%, and then you'll be able to see anywhere that you gotta clean up. All right, so I'm just gonna get rid of that layer for now, but let's go on to color corrections. So where have you guys typically done your color corrections? So speaking of like your digital photo 1 class, where did you do your color corrections?
We usually do levels, you look at the levels and saturations.
Okay, so curves, levels is very similar to curves, right? But curves gives us more control over our image. So I'm going to go to my adjustment layer, drop down, and go to curves. And there's a few palettes that I want to make sure that I have open. One of them is my, my properties panel, and that's showing me just my curves adjustment. Another one is the info palette. So I'll click on this and I'll have my info palette. Now, if you don't see any of these on the screen in your layout, then you can go to window and then you can choose which one of these that you want to see. So info palette, I have that pulled up, and I've got the properties panel, and then of course my layers palette.
So info, property,
So yes, my info palette, which has my red, green, and blue, and it's got the little eyedropper in it. The properties panel, which just shows me what I'm working with, what layer adjustment I'm working with, and then all of our layers.
so info, property, all the layers.
And you can reset your workspace. So right now, there's this little panel up here, and you can set it so that it stays the same anytime that you're working. Say, for instance, you know that you always work with layers, adjustments, info, properties, and color swatches. Then you could make sure that you can change your workspace so that those automatically come up whenever you open Photoshop. So you can reset the workspace, or you can change the workspace. But I've got the panels up that I need. So now I'm going to work with my black point. In the properties panel for curves, you'll see there's a black eyedropper. And when I hover over it, it says sample and images to set black point. Press option to display clipping preview. I'm going to double click in this black eyedropper because I need to set my target shadow color. So I'm going to do that again. So in the properties panel, black eyedropper, double click on the black eyedropper. That brings up your color picker and allows for you to set your target shadow color. If you haven't worked on this computer previously, then these numbers are going to be set to the red, the green, and the blue are going to be set to 0, 0, and 0. You're going to want to change them. 0 is absolute black. And we're going to want to change them to 7, 7, and 7. All that does is it takes our black point and it moves it up just a hair from being absolute black. Yes?
So is this why, like, in my image, I see a ton of black, but I did the all and whatever, and, like, nothing came off of black? Is that why I need to change the RGB?
Yeah, so each time that you come into the computer, if you haven't used it recently, they reset everything. So you're going to want to check for the target shadow color to make sure that under red, green, and blue, it's 7, 7, and 7. I'm going to say OK, and it's going to say, hey, do you want to save this as the new default? Yes, you do. So that way, the next time you open Photoshop and you go to make a color correction, it's going to have that default saved. So now when I say yes, and I double click on that black eyedropper, you'll see that the 7, 7, and 7 in my red, green, and blue channels, that's my new default. Before I forget, if I've set my black point, what else am I, or my target shadow point, what else am I gonna need to set? Target highlight. So I'm gonna double click into the white eyedropper. Click, click, and that brings up my target highlight color. Now this is already set since I've been using this computer.
Previous one was for the black eyedropper?
For the, yes, for the target shadow color. Now if I had not used this computer and I opened up the target highlight, my red, green, and blue would be set to 255, 255, 255. Can anybody tell me what the significance of those numbers are? The 0 for black and the 255 for white?
Is that like a down, is it down there the white?
So those numbers specifically go from 0 to 255.
255 is the widest, and well, that's the value of that particular color. And
Yes.
when you mix them up, they get different.
So yeah, with our histogram, we have 255 levels of brightness. So 0 equals absolute and pure black, and 255 equals absolute and pure white. The reason I'm changing the shadow up to 7 is so that it's just above pure black. And the reason I'm changing the white to 247 is so that it's just above pure white. So say for instance, if we were printing here, and we have these target highlight and shadow set. If the part of the image was pure white, it wouldn't lay down any ink because there's no information, it's pure white. But because I've changed it to 247, 247, and 247, it sets it to just above pure white, so it's like ever so slightly off white, but still neutral. So it, yes, in the RGB.
And what is that in?
This is for our color picker for the target highlight color. So I found this by double clicking on the white eyedropper.
So, color correction is really for printing, it's not necessarily for like, web or.
It depends on the output of your image. But yes, for printing, this is going to be ideally what you would do to make sure that it's going to print correctly.
Okay, I got one more question. So with the droppers, you're not actually going and selecting, you're just going, opening that window and setting it.
That's what I'm doing initially. Right now I'm just setting myself up to do color corrections. I'm not actually changing anything.
But that's affecting the window right? That's your kind of like histogram kind of, or your
So-
curve.
It's going to, well, once I actually set my white point, it's going to change it to these numbers.
So
Right, so if I clicked in something that was white in the image and I said, hey, I want you to make this white, I want this to be my new highlight, if I hadn't made these changes, it would make it 255, 255, 255. And my black would be 0, 0, 0. But because I've made these changes, it's brought in our black and our white just a hair. All right, so now it's got it 247, 247, 247. Say okay. And
17 it said?
what's that?
It said 17, didn't it?
You might have been looking in one of the other.
Yeah, that below the 247.
Okay, so yeah, that's the swatch of it. Swatch. So now I'm going to start color correction. Before I start, I'm going to label my layers. So I've got my curves here, and I want to know whenever I look at my layers palette what each and every layer is actually doing. So double click into the name, and now I can change it to black. So I know that that's my black point. And to set my black point, I'm going to click once onto the black eyedropper, and as I hover over that, you'll see that it says sample in image to set the black point. Okay, so I'm going to click once, and now whenever I go to the bottom of my histogram in the curves palette, do you see that there's a little triangle slider? And if I click and hold on this, then it's making the whole image darker. So this is taking my entire histogram and kind of compressing it. So this is making the whole image darker. Now, if I combined holding this slider, like I'm clicking the mouse and holding it and sliding over. If I combine that with the Option key, you'll see that the whole image goes white. So this is going to give me my, my clipping preview. So right now you don't see anything happening, but I'm sliding, and then as I start to slide it over, you see the image come up, right? But it's inverted. So this is showing me visually on my image where the darkest parts of my image are starting to reveal themselves. So it's showing me that right here in her hairline, and I can zoom into that, right there in the hairline.
And this is sample images.
So I'm not sampling anything yet. I'm just, when I clicked onto the black eyedropper, and then I use this slider here to move the black point over, if I combine that by holding in the Alt Option key, then that's going to show me where the black first starts to come up in the image. So this is a visual indicator of where black first starts to come up in the image. Now, this may be different than what you've seen in other classes, The reason I do this is because I like to be able to see exactly where black is coming up in the image.
So you just hit option or alt option?
Yeah, so it's Alt Option, or it's the same key. So yeah, Option. So I drag it over. Now I could do this. What sometimes you'll have to do. Say you don't have black in your image, you could just drag this over until you see the start of your info in the histogram. You see where the histogram starts right there. So if you don't have black in your image, you may just need to pull this over until black starts in the picture. But I know that I've got a true black in the picture because in her hairline we have a dark shadow in her hair, so I know that is, and I know that's black. But if we hold down the Alt or Option key, then it's going to show me where that information first starts to come up. And I'm going to zoom in. And again, all I've got to do now is just press the Option key, and that shows me my image again. And I want to find a part of the image that is supposed to be black. If I accidentally clicked on something that was blue, then it's going to think that I want to change that to my target shadow. So I'm going to choose this area where I've got black. Now look at my info palette. Now if you're far away and you're not able to see the screen, come in and get in close. Go ahead and look at the info palette and notice in the red, the green, and the blue, we've got several numbers. You've got 33, 35, 29, and then there's a backslash and 0. So right here in the info palette, right here, and the problem is as I move my mouse away from that part of my image, those numbers change. So you see how those numbers all just kind of zoom around? But if I hold down the Alt Option key and I find a part of my image that I know is supposed to be black, look what's going on with the red, the green, and the blue. You see it says 33, 35, and 29. So that's telling me how much red, green, and blue I have in that particular part of the image, in each one of those channels. So something I forgot to tell you guys that you will want to do with your info palette, your info palette is most likely going to be set with a red, green, and blue, and then a CMYK. You're going to want to change the CMYK to just K. And the way, there's several ways to do that. The easiest way is to click onto the eyedropper and hold, and then that gives you all of the options. So I'm just going to say grayscale. And now it changes CMYK to just K. So it's just giving me a reading from absolute white to absolute black. So 0 would be black and 100% would be white. I'm sorry, other way around. So 0 is absolute white, there's no information, and 100% is absolute black. So now you can see whenever I'm over here in my image and it has my red, green, and blue readouts, it says 33, 35, and 30. Those numbers are relatively close together. So it doesn't seem like I have a really heavy color cast in my shadows. But we can look at this image and know that there's a heavy color cast. So I'm going to reset this because I've already set my target shadow. When I click, watch what happens to those numbers in the red, the green, and the blue. So I'm going to click. Now what happened to the second set of numbers? They made it 7, 7, and 7 because that's my new target shadow. I'm going to do it again. So I've got my my slider pulled over, right? I've got my slider pulled over, and I can see that black is coming into the image, and you can go right there to the beginning of the histogram if you want. I'm going to go over a tiny bit more. And I'm looking at my image, and I can see where it says 33, 35, and 29 in the red, the green, and the blue, and then you see a backslash, backslash, backslash with all zeros. When I click, it's going to change those zeros to 7, 7, and 7. So that's setting my new target shadow. So the first set of numbers is what the image was, and the second set of numbers, the sevens, that's what the image is now. So you had what it was, and after I clicked, what it is.
So was prior to you setting that the image?
I'll do it again.
I'm
So-
gonna look at the image.
So 33, 35, 29, click 777. So I'll zoom out so you can see the change that was made. So all I'm going to do is just click off of my black curves, and you'll see that what it's done is it's added some contrast. It just added some contrast to our image. So now we have a rich black in the picture. So we've got the black set. Now we've got to set the white. So if we set the black with the curves palette, we're going to go back down, and I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to name this one white. So
Wait, so, I kinda missed a little bit. So to recap real quick, after combining the black eyedropper with all options to see which part is darkest, you do what to see which one is lightest again?
I'll go through it one more time, okay? I'll go through it once more. So I'm going to get rid of my white. I'm going to go back to the black, and I'm just going to reset it. So this is our image, and using the properties panel for our curves adjustment, I'm going to drag this slider over, and if I'm dragging that slider over while simultaneously holding in the option key, you can see where black first starts to come up in the image. So
You don't have to click on the black eyedropper for anything to do that?
oh, good point. In order to set the black, I would have to have that black eyedropper highlighted. Thank you, Lisa. So that black eyedropper is now highlighted, and I've pulled over on the image to see where black first starts to come in. And when I click, it's going to set to my new target shadow. So you can see where it was 91% in the K, and now it says 100. And then you see the numbers in the R, G, and B, 33, 36, and 30. When I click, those numbers become 7, 7, and 7. So now I've created a little more contrast in the image. It's darker, we have a rich black, and that black is neutral because now those numbers are all the same. So after,
Get the RGB to 777.
so when you click, because you've set the target shadow, when you click in a part of the image that should be black, it's automatically going to set that to 7, 7, and 7.
Alright.
So now we're gonna do the white, and the white is done exactly the same way that the black is done. So I'm gonna click onto the white eyedropper, and remember that we've already set this to 247 in our red, green, and blue. So I've got the white eyedropper, and so what's the first thing that I do?
Click what? The
So I click the white eyedropper,
Oh,
now
grab
what?
the slider from the right side and pull it until you see, yeah.
All right, so holding the option and using that white slider, I can see where I've got white first coming up in the image. So I'm pulling the slider over, and then I can see right there. I'm not seeing white just yet, but let's zoom in and see what is happening. So here's something that some people, if you don't have white in your image and you're like, oh no, what am I gonna use? You may be tempted to use eyes or teeth, but what's the problem you might run into with that?
Reflection.
My teeth aren't white. The whites of my eyes aren't even white. So if you use that, it's not gonna give you a pure white, and if I set that as my target highlight, then it can throw it off because our teeth have yellow and our eyes oftentimes have red or even some bluish tint, even in the whites of our eyes. So rather than using the white, if you can find something that is white in the image, that's ideal. The other thing that you might want to avoid is, say you had some really highly reflective jewelry. And the light reflects off of that. That's called a specular highlight. And if you choose a specular highlight, it's not gonna correct your color cast because it's something that is just a direct reflection of your light source. It's supposed to be pure white. So I know that I do have white in her scarf, and I'm gonna use that. So it's something that we need to know that it actually is white. So holding this down, those numbers, look in the K. So that was 40%. That's like halfway through 0 and 100. So that's pulling the exposure up quite a bit because I'm pulling the highlights in. And if I were to click right here, it's gonna change that 40% to 9%. And then look at what's going on in my red, green, and blue. I'm gonna stop right there. So you see where it says red is 155, the green is 255, and the blue is 255? One of those color channels is significantly different than the other two, right? So that's telling us that that's where our color cast is. Now if you're like, well, it says it's in the red channel, but that doesn't look like it's a red color cast. What is the color cast?
Blue.
It's the opposite of red, which is cyan.
Oh, yeah,
So our complements in red, green, and blue for additive color is we've got red and cyan, green and magenta, blue and yellow. So that's why we're seeing that. What looks like a blue cast is actually cyan. So I'm going to click right there.
Where'd you go?
Yep, that was a big change, wasn't it? So all right, so I move this in and I can see that we've got white in the scarf here, and I'm looking at my numbers and I've got 155, 255, 255, and when I click,
You clicking on your numbers?
No, she's looking at
She's like on the star.
Oh, it's
Two
not.
spread out, 155, 'cause now you wanna keep them as close as possible and then two spread out like the way you want.
that's gonna be our next step. That's our next step.
So, holding down the option key, click on the area where it has the most light.
So yeah, we're seeing where
White comes first.
yes, where our highlight is coming in first in our image, and it needs to be something that is actually white. So I will click right here, and you'll see that that is a very significant change. So let's look and see what difference occurred between our white. So that's the black, okay, and here's the white.
Does that mean when you took this photo, just did a copy exposure?
No, whenever the image was scanned, remember when I showed you the Imicon scanner, how you can remove the auto correction by pulling the sliders to 0 in your shadows and 255 in your highlights? So this is just making sure that you have all of your image information to work with. And then rather than the computer or the scanner picking your shadow and your highlight, you are picking your highlight and your shadow.
But that's only if you use that.
Yeah, you still may need to do a color correction even though you're using these, but these do apply an automatic correction. So that's better than it was, right? So look at what our histogram looks like right now. And then with the black, you can see that it pulls it over to the shadows. And then for the white, now it's pulled that information over to the white. So it's basically just kind of compressed or given us, we now have black and we now have white. So you can see that that information is spread out across the entire histogram in our curved properties. So now we have to do our gray. Before I do anything else, I'm going to change where it says curves. I'm going to change that to where it says white so I know which one is which. And this is where it breaks with what you would think would make sense. If I did the black and the white in my curves, what would you assume that you would do with your gray?
Go there.
That you would again use curves to adjust for that. Fight the urge to go to this gray eyedropper. So I did the black and I did the white, but fight the urge to go to the gray. Because if I use this, then it is going to neutralize anywhere in the image that I click, but I want to be able to see these numbers and know what's happening. I don't want to trust what's going on the screen. I want to know what the numbers are telling me, because the numbers don't lie. Screens lie, but the numbers don't lie. So I'm going to go over to my eyedropper palette in the tools. What?
If we can do curves or not?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet, but I will. So I'm not creating another curves layer just yet. You could, but in order to avoid using the gray point eyedropper, I'm gonna come over here, and this is the part that everybody forgets. So in your notes, put a big asterisk right next to this so that you don't forget it. Don't use gray eyedropper in curves palette. Go to the tools on the opposite side of your screen. We've all used the eyedropper tool before. We probably used it to sample a color, right? So right now I'm hovering over and it's showing you what the eyedropper tool does. It samples color from an image. I'm sure that we've all used this. But have you seen the drop-down menu for the color sampler, or for the eyedropper tool? If I click and I hold, it's gonna show me additional options. So the first one is eyedropper tool. That's the default. The next one is the color sampler tool. Color sampler tool. And what this is doing is it's just going to allow me to make a reference point. So I'm going to use the color sampler tool. And then up here, whenever you select a tool, it's going to give you different options. Remember, for the crop, it had different options. For the healing brush, it had different options. This one is sample size. The default on your computer is most likely going to be point sample.
Is it point sample?
That's what the default is going to be.
Default.
You guys are going to change it. So when I hover over it, it says the number of pixels sampled by the samplers. Actually, that's funny. I hadn't read that before. The number of pixels sampled by the samplers. I'm going to change it from point sample to 3x3 average. The reason I'm doing this is because, say for instance, I took a reference point, a color sample point, and I'm basing that information on a single pixel. What if I pick the wrong pixel? I'm going to pick a sample size that's a little bit larger, and it's going to average those pixels together. Does that make sense?
What's it called?
It's called the sample size. So whenever I pick the eyedropper, I'm going to use the drop-down menu, and I find the drop-down menu just by clicking and click and hold on the mouse, and I can get the color sampler tool. And now up here it says sample size, and I'm going to change the sample size to a 3x3 average. Now you can see a bunch of other options here. The reason that you may choose one of those other options is going to be dependent on how big your file is. Say I was doing a billboard. I wouldn't want to base my color sample on a single pixel, right? I would probably use something that was a much larger sample size, so I didn't accidentally pick the wrong pixel. So this just takes a couple and averages them together.
Can you tell me about this one for that? That is something like important for that.
Luckily, I'm recording this, so you'll be able to go back through, and if you want, once I'm completed with this, I'll go through it once again quickly, without,
Okay,
I can do that. All right, so I've got the eyedropper in the tool palette. I've set my sample size to a 3x3 average, and now I'm gonna zoom in, and I need to find something in my image that is neutral gray. That's neutral gray. I think what I'm going to try to do is choose the wrong thing just to show you what not to do. I'll do that first, okay? So say in my memory, that background was gray, it wasn't blue. And I'm convinced that that background was gray. If I use this as my color sample point, it's going to shift all the other colors in my image. I'm just gonna do it quickly by doing that.
So using the eyedrop tool, the tool palette, look for any neutral gray.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead, I'll continue with this and do it the correct way so as not to confuse. So I've got my black point set, I've got my white point set, and now I need to find something that is neutral gray. If somebody is wearing silver, then that's a good place to start. So if they're wearing jewelry or a watch, then that can often give you a neutral gray to choose. So I'm gonna zoom in so that I can really see what's happening here. And this is where it can, again, be very hard if you don't have a neutral gray in the image. And even if you do, it might reflect color from what's around it because it's a shiny surface. But I'm going to look in my earring here because it's a gray metal. And I'm looking in my K or my grayscale for a very specific range of numbers. Does anybody remember what those range of numbers in the K or the grayscale we're looking for? Close.
50.
68 to 72%. And it's kind of the inverse of your 18% gray, but 68 to 72% in the K or the grayscale is the range that we're looking for our midtones. So to say that over again, we are using the color sampler tool. We are locating something in our image that should be neutral gray, and then we want to place a sample in an area that is between 68 and 72% in our grayscale readout.
So just click on the right.
Yep. So I'm looking in the K right now, and remember the first set of numbers is what it was, the second set of numbers is what it is now. Now when I click, nothing is going to happen except, you see the info palette, right? You're going to see you're going to see another info palette with the red, the green, and the blue pop up. But whenever I move around the screen, you see how these numbers all change? This isn't going to change. It's going to be a reference. It's like I'm saying, hey, I want to be able to see these numbers, and I don't want them to change because I want to see which one is producing the color cast. So I'm going to get back to my 72. 68, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna click right here. It's got 68% in the gray. I'm gonna click. So nothing happened in my image other than it gave me this little bullseye where it says the number 1, and then the info palette has given me another readout with the red, the green, and the blue. But now those numbers are fixed. So it's a reference. That's it, it's just a reference. Now look at those numbers, Ty, and tell me what they are.
Left or right?
So in the number 1, because that's where I've set my color sample point,
Right.
we've got
116.
100 and 101. So one of those numbers is further off than the other ones, right? Now it may be a number that's either higher or lower than the other two. In this case, the red is 15 points higher than the blue and 16 points higher than the green. So that's telling me that we have a color cast in the red channel. So now I can correct for that by going back over to my layers palette, creating a third curves adjustment, naming this one gray, and I'm going to attempt to correct for that red color cast.
Now you're creating the curves.
Yep, so I just made a curve. You could do it at the beginning, Eileen. I just did it now so it wouldn't be confusing with people trying to go get that gray eyedropper. So I can see that the red channel, because of the numbers, tells me that that's where I've got a cast in my midtones. I corrected the color cast in my shadows, I corrected the color cast in my highlights, and now I've identified the color cast in my gray or my neutral.
Now, why is it red and not cyan here?
That's actually a great question. So depending on which, if that number is higher or lower, is gonna depend on whether it's red or cyan. So if I've identified it's either red or cyan, now I need to go into that channel and make a correction. So right here, back to the properties panel, you see where it says RGB at the top of my curves? If I click on that and hold, it reveals red, green, and blue. It's showing me, this view is showing me the red, the green, and the blue all together. You remember in your camera, if you look at the histogram on your camera, and it'll show like the red, and it'll show a green, and it'll show a blue. It's got all those different channels overlaid together. You guys seen that on your camera? So that's just showing you all of the channels together. This one is showing you basically what the grayscale would be. But I can see that my red, that number is out of whack from the other ones. So I'm just gonna go into my red channel. So I'm gonna choose red. It's easy to tell that you've chosen red because now our histogram is red. Now I dealt with the shadows and I dealt with the highlights, so I'm not gonna use these two sliders. Instead, I'm gonna go right in the center of my histogram because that's my midtones, right here, right in the middle. And I'm gonna drag that red line either up or down. So in this case, I'm dragging it down, and watch what happens to the numbers in my color sample point. So when I drag it down, I'm not even gonna look at the image, but look what happens to the color sample point where it says number 1. We've got 116. I drag down, and now bring those numbers closer together. And this can be where you use your own intuition as far as what you feel like works best for the image, because you may feel like this is now too cool. You may feel like that looks a little bit better. So you can use your own judgment, but I can see that now that these numbers are closer together, it was at 116, now it's 101, 100, and 101. So let's see the change that was made.
So how did you get the red line on that curve again?
So whenever you see your properties palette in the curves, it's showing it to you as the default is red, green, and blue. It's taking the red, green, and blue channels and showing them all to you at one time. But I've seen through the color sample that my red is what has the color cast. So I'm only gonna go into the red channel, and you do that, Paul, by holding down on the RGB and just going to the red channel. And again, I've done nothing with this gray eyedropper. All I've done is I've dragged down on the line that's in the middle so that I can bring my neutral, oh, I turned it off. So that I can bring my neutral closer to the green and the blue. So what is this telling me? Basically, it's just saying that when you've got your red, your green, and your blue, and they're all the same number or relatively close, that you've neutralized a color cast in your midtones. With the black, we're able to click and it makes it 777. With the white, we're able to click and make it 255, 255, 255.
And then with the case of the red, you have to get it to the middle just right.
Well, because this image had a red color cast, now if it went the opposite way, then it would have been a cyan cast. But because this particular image had a cast in the red channel, that's why I'm choosing red.
Okay.
Okay?
If all your numbers were close when you got in here, would you leave it alone?
Probably.
Wouldn't mess with it?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got something that you've clicked on that's actually neutral and all the numbers are relatively the same, cool. So now I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to choose something that isn't correct just to show you if you don't choose a neutral gray, what can happen. Say for instance, you're like, oh, I'm looking at my K and I found 68 to 72%. Yay me! So you click right there and then you color correct for it. But where you clicked in the 68 to 72% was blue jeans. Well, blue jeans aren't neutral gray, they're blue. So then you would shift everything else in your image. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so yay, I found 70%. Yay me. So I'm gonna click and it's gonna give me a color sample point. There we go. There's my color sample point. And I've got a number 2 and it says 125, 86, and 58. Oh geez, those are all really far apart. Let's make them all the same so I can neutralize my image. Well, I know what I've got to do. I've got to go into my red channel and I'm going to bring that down to 86. Okay, now I'm going to take my blue channel and I'm going to bring that up to match the other ones. Okay, so now okay, it looks perfect. So I've gotten these numbers closer together, right? They're all super close together. It's because I chose something in the image. Just because it was 68 to 72% in the K didn't mean that it was a neutral gray. I chose something that was yellow, which in turn turned the image, the opposite of yellow, blue.
So you're basically saying make sure that you have a gray, a neutral gray in there. That's
Yes.
basically, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Neutral
So
gray.
what's the point of the gray eyedropper?
You could use the gray eyedropper. That's a great point, Eileen. So let's do that. So no, I mean seriously. I'm glad that you said that. So I'm going to trash this. No, I don't want to trash the layer. I'm just gonna revert. So I could take the gray eyedropper. I'm gonna get rid of my all my samples. Let's just say that we went to the eyedropper and I'm like, yeah, I think that was a gray background. So I click. So what it did was it took that gray or the blue background that I thought was gray and it neutralized it. So, but what if it wasn't gray? Now I just need to throw it away and start over. So now if I did pick the right thing, if I knew what I was looking for and I totally picked the right thing, I could get it where it needed to be, 72. Click. Okay. So it helped, you know? And I can't look because I didn't lay down a color sample point, but wherever I clicked in the image, and you can click around in the image and it's gonna change that neutral.
So it's just safer.
It just gives you a visual reference to know which color you have a cast in and correct specifically for that. Now, go ahead.
If there isn't something that looks like neutral gray in your image, what do you do?
That's a really good question. There's another technique that I found, and it's hit or miss, and it's taking your layer, taking an empty layer and filling it with gray, and then doing a threshold on it, and then using your curves. It's really kind of complicated. I prefer trying to take something that I think is neutral gray, and sometimes just setting the black point and the white point will clear up your color cast. But because this is a film scan, and I chose one that was like a really heavy color cast, just to kind of give a dramatic effect, yeah, I was trying to make it more difficult. But oftentimes you can just do a black point and white point, and then just kind of check and see if you think it looks good, and it might be fine. Now, is there anything else that people may have used when they were doing color corrections besides curves?
Yes.
Probably.
It does look flat, but it's just me. That image.
Yeah, she took off her color correction.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
She erased it to show us how.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm gonna actually show you. I'm gonna show you a cheat. I'm gonna show you a cheat method.
Can we use it?
You can, but I'm gonna make you go through all of the steps to show that you can do it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I actually know for a fact on this image it doesn't work, but I'm gonna show it to you anyways because on some images it works great. So rather than doing the gray here, I'm just gonna go back. Notice that there's an auto button in your curves panel?
So we didn't even have to go through all that trouble.
No, you do, because I need to know that you know how to do the color corrections. But I'm gonna actually show you that the auto doesn't work for you here. Now, it may work for you in some instances. It may get you close to where you need to be. But if I click auto, let's go back because,
Say you have to take off the white and
yeah,
black too.
yeah. So, all right, so we've got our image, and let's just do, I'm gonna do a curves, and I'm gonna call this one auto so I know which one it is. And I just click auto. Now, it didn't really do very much for me, did it? Thanks, Photoshop algorithm for auto. It didn't really do much. So, but here's the thing. There's secret hidden panels in a lot of your tools in Photoshop. How do I access this secret hidden panel? So if you hit option and click auto, option, auto, it gives me auto color correction options. And we've got 4 options. One is enhanced brightness and contrast, which didn't do very much of anything. That's the auto default. There's enhanced monochromatic contrast, which didn't do anything good. I can try to snap neutral midtones. Okay, still not good. Enhance per channel contrast, whoa. Well, if I turn off snap neutral midtones, it's better than it was. Fine light and dark, snap neutral midtones, nope. So my best bet on here was enhance per channel contrast and with snap neutral unchecked. Essentially what this auto is doing is it's taking my shadow and it's changing it to 777. So it's automatically choosing my darkest point and making it 777. It's automatically choosing my brightest point and making it 247, 247, 247. And it's automatically taking what it believes to be my midtones and putting it in the middle, which is 128, 128, 128. So this may work for you, but it's important to know if you do this, you may still need to tweak it one way or another. I'm gonna go ahead and set my color sample point again. I'm gonna do my black, I'm gonna do my white, and I'm gonna get my
Actually,
gray.
when you did that with the auto, would you go back and just do a color sample point on the gray, or would you run through them all to see?
You could try, I mean, you could start there and then see if you can correct the midtone, because yeah, it's the midtone that's really not working well in that auto selection. Okay. All right. Oh, I need to get rid of that. That's what's going on. All right, clear. So I'm just gonna do this again so I can show you another way that you may have used. And you can use this if it's more comfortable for you, if you're more familiar with it. So all right, 79. So I'm going to go back in my red and I'm going to, oops. Oh, that looks terrible. Hold on, I've done something and I'm not quite sure what.
You had readjusted one of those.
Oh, there's auto still checked. That's what's going on. Haha. All right, so now I can go back to this. Get rid of my color sample.
How do you get rid of the sample?
Oh, so if you leave it on, when you turn it in, it's not gonna affect your image. I just know that you did your color corrections. So I like seeing that there. But if you wanna get rid of it, say you put it in the wrong place, wherever you click, all you have to do is say clear all. I think you can also hover over it and delete it. Yeah, you can hover over it, hit option, and it'll get rid of it. But I'm gonna do another one so that I can, all right, click, and I'm gonna go to my, so some of you may have used color balance when you're doing color corrections, right? So I can look at this and say, okay, red, and then just use, I'm in my midtones, right, in color balance, and use my red, and I can pull the red down, but notice what's happening is
Changing the other numbers.
it's changing my other numbers too. So curves just gives you like precise control in each channel. But like I said, some of you may have used the color balance, and this can certainly be helpful to get certain colors out of your highlights, your shadows, or your midtones. But notice it does change all of those numbers as I'm pulling them down. Yeah, it is making it kind of flat.
So is that a case where you do, say you use color balance and you've got one area you're working on, you could then like do a layer mask and invert it and push it back and use another area right there?
Sure. So yeah, say for instance, you noticed that she had, you know, a sunburn or something. You may be able to go in and use that to help reduce that in just the skin and mask it out. But so this gives you, at least this gives you guys an idea of, you know, where to start for your color correction. So as promised, I'm going to go through this. I'm going to go through it quickly from start to finish without telling you about all the other little tips and tricks and all that. So you can just, without writing notes, you can just kind of keep an eye on what I'm doing. All right, got my background copy. Next thing I'm going to do is create a curves, just to double check and make sure that I've got the target shadow correct. Double click 777, okay? I'm going to use the slider here at the bottom, holding in the option key. I'm going to pull that over until I start to see black come up in the image. I'm going to zoom in, so I'm selecting an area of my image that I want to make black. And, okay, all right, click. And now I'm going to name that. We're going to name it black. Go back to my curves, do another layer, name this one white. Double click on the white eyedropper. Is it at 247, 247, 247? It is. I'm going to use the white slider, holding in the white Alt Option key. I'm going to pull in until I start to see the lightest tones in my image appear, and I can see them right here in the scarf. And I'm going to click and hold, or click, and now that's changed my highlight to 247, 247, 247. I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to make another curves adjustment, and this is going to be my gray. I'm going to bypass the gray eyedropper in my curves palette, go to my color sampler, and then zoom in on the area that I believe to have a neutral gray. I'm going to look for the numbers 68 to 72% in the K, or my grayscale. And I'm going to click, and I actually don't like where that one is. Okay, and now I can see I've got 120 in the red, 101 in the green, and 101 in the blue, which tells me that I have a color cast in my red channel. I go to the red channel. I start in the middle of my histogram, not in the shadows, not in the highlights, but in the, bless you, but in the midtone. And I'm just going to drag that slider down so that those numbers are closer together. And I might not make them exactly 101, 101, 101, because that might make it too neutral or too blue. I still want to have a little warmth in the image. So maybe I decide on 109, and that has taken some of the red out of my image, but not, you know, not all of it. So there's still a little bit of warmth. All right, so that's setting your black point, your white point, setting a color sample for your gray, and then correcting in the red, the green, or the blue channel to get rid of your color cast. Sound good?
Mm.